Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Today, our speaker is Mr. Brett Johnson, co-founder and CEO of Altru Institute, a philanthropic think tank that supports organizations addressing global humanitarian challenges. Mr. Johnson is an experienced entrepreneur with a history of innovating in the communications field. He is skilled in addressing complex challenges with innovative solutions. He is experienced also in medical devices, biotechnology, publishing, media, and healthcare. Over to you, Mr. Johnson.
Well, thank you, Christine. I hope you can hear me okay. Appreciate that nice introduction. I think today what I was hoping to talk a little bit about was, the origins of the Altru Institute and some of the major initiatives we have going on. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. So the Altru Institute was formed about 6 years ago, and our central idea was that we could use the notion of collaboration to address some very complex global challenges. We would meet in New York, but also in Davos, Switzerland, concurrent with the World Economic Forum. And the notion was it gives us an opportunity to really to reach out to some world leaders and bring them together in one place. Coming out of the 2020 meeting, this would be January 2020, what really seemed to be gripping the world was this struggle with the climate issue. It was the dominant theme, and it was one where we felt we could apply our model, which is around technology and innovation, to make some progress in that regard. And so we began working on a thing called Bend the Climate Curve, and the climate campaign began. Unfortunately, the COVID hit shortly thereafter and really put us back. And so we had to, we worked on some COVID-related strategies, but really had great hopes that we could get back on addressing the climate issue. As we dug into the climate, and as a result, in the last 6 months, because COVID has wound down, we've been able to do that. So we held our meeting in Switzerland back in January, in May, and then also again in January, and really began to zoom in on what could we do and how could we approach this. And our simple approach really is technology driven, and that is, identify the breakthrough technologies that could have an impact on this issue. And then the notion is, but more central to that is, identify all the people in the organizations that are trying to solve the same problem. So what we really began to do is reaching out to those who are focused on clean technology, conservation, innovation, and really began to build a broad network of people that are trying to address this. And as you know, this is a problem that is gripping the entire world, and obviously there's a lot of people who care and concerned about this. And so we felt there's a real opportunity for us to make a contribution. And so with that as the backdrop, we began to look for what are some technology areas that could be developed that could have a real impact. Because the fundamental idea is that if you identify the problem and then you identify the people that are trying to solve the problem, and you begin to identify the breakthrough technologies in that area, can you then zoom in and focus on those technologies and begin to help accelerate their adoption? And so essentially what we're trying to do is identify the technologies that can move the needle and to accelerate the adoption of those technologies. And only therein can you really have any hope of achieving the goals of the Paris Accord, which, as you know, is a 1.5 centigrade increase from pre-industrial levels by 2050. And so that's really our model. And we've, in that process, we've gone out and identified that there are some truly exciting technologies. the one that we're zooming in on most right now is the waste to energy issue. And that is, there are thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of landfills all across the world that are causing an environmental problem and concern for municipalities in terms of they leach it into the groundwater contamination. But they also are vast emitters of greenhouse gases. The methane that comes out of a landfill is 50 times more powerful and potent than is a carbon dioxide. And so there's those two problems. But what's really fascinating is that there's been advances in technology that enable the capacity to take waste, municipal solid waste, as well as wood waste and industrial waste, but let me talk about municipal solid waste for a moment first, to take that and turn it into fuel, into clean fuel, using technologies to essentially grind up and dry, first to separate the waste coming in, and then grind up and dry the organic waste, and then put that through a reactor process that generates a gas, and then the gas through a process that generates a clean fuel. So this would be SAF, which is a sustainable airline fuel, high quality or clean diesel and clean gasoline. And so that's a new advance. It's a new development, and it's an example of the kind of thing we want to try to do is find that breakthrough that is out there that could make a difference. Another technology that came into that space that we got into is in the area of steel manufacture. One of the most significant emitters of greenhouse gases is the manufacture of steel. I think it's upwards between 8 and 10% of all emissions are from the manufacture of steel. And so we identified and found a technology out of Canada that the Canadian government had been backing that took waste from wood waste and was able to use it to generate clean energy to fuel a steel plant. So right now they're building outside Toronto, Canada, they're building a plant that will provide energy from waste wood products that has a 50% carbon intensity of the current means of production of steel. So that also is a huge opportunity. And that's a case where pretty much anywhere there's a steel mill being in position, there could easily be one of these factories could build, one of these processing plants could build. So those are sort of the two that got us into that space. I'll talk a little bit more about that, then I'll shift to the other major thing that we're working on, and you give me a sense of my time here, Christine. With regard to the waste to energy thing, one of the ways that came to us was we were contacted by the government of a representative of the government of Costa Rica, and they have a massive waste problem in Costa Rica, and they were understanding our interest in this space and such. And so I was able to have a meeting with the president of Costa Rica in Davos to talk about what his main issue was. And he has an issue of the municipal waste problem, but also energy independence. He's not able to, they pretty much import all their fuel. And so they would like to be able to, if they had a capacity to make specifically SAF, which is sustainable airline fuel. There's many countries now where you cannot fly, airlines cannot arrive without some percentage of their fuel being sustainable. And so that was an additional expense that he faced just to use his the airline system there. So that was a really key thing. And that technology that was described, the waste to energy technology, is really three different companies from around the world, one in Canada, one in Grenville, South Carolina, and one in San Diego. And these are people that have spent their whole lives and careers trying to come up with solutions to this problem. And then they've been coming together recently, and that's exciting. So that's one of the examples of technologies that we work on. Another one is a high speed processor, essentially that goes much faster than the current data microprocessor. And this is important because data centers are also one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, and one of the biggest challenges for the environment. We increasingly use our computers. Every time we're using our computers or our apps, that's all being driven by a data center. And these data centers are massive hogs of energy and massive hogs of water. And so the only hope then is, if we're going to continue to do this, is we need to have lower generating energy from these microprocessors. So that's another example. Let me shift ahead to our other major initiative, which is really quite exciting, and that is around Ukraine. As I said earlier, our mission is to identify the most complex global challenges and try to tackle them with a simple model of collaboration. Get all the people that are working on the same thing together to try to share information. And so the Ukraine situation, obviously, we're well aware of what's happened there. And so we began to think, well, what might we do to use our model along that lines? And in Davos, we hosted a session to address the Ukraine issue. And we were fortunate to secure the president of the Ukraine Venture Capital and Private Equity Association, a wonderful gentleman, Andrei Koledyuk, to come join us. And we spent 2 days with him. And he also introduced us to the people that run the largest energy company, the largest state-owned enterprise, Naftogaz, in Ukraine, and others that are passionate about the future of Ukraine and what can be done. And what we concluded was that we have an opportunity, given our sort of our network in the venture and the innovation space, to really bolster the Ukrainian economy and to find and attract investment into Ukraine now, even despite the difficult challenges that are going on there. There's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit and talent that, with proper support, could help bolster that economy so that it can continue to function despite the tremendous challenges that are under, but also to create lay the groundwork for what inevitably is going to be a rebuild of that country. And we think it could have the same dynamics as did after World War II, the Marshall Plan, where it was a huge, significant investment in West Germany that made Germany the powerhouse it is today, because its plants and equipments have been all new and modernized. And I think many believe and see that could be what's going to happen in Ukraine. And so our notion is, if we can begin to organize the best and brightest innovators and entrepreneurs and the financiers who see this vision, and we can begin to orchestrate a higher level of support for Ukrainian, the Ukrainian economy, we can have a huge impact on that whole situation. So those are our two big themes. I don't know if I should take some questions now, as it is today, to try to find where are the unique opportunities. And the one that we've discovered where we think is significant is in the application of its IT sector. It has a very robust IT sector, the information technology, software, programming, and so on and so forth. And that has continued to do fine, despite the obvious interruptions in electricity. Obviously stop and make difficult programming and running computers and so on. But it continued to be strong. And there's I think 8 unicorns now that have happened in Ukraine. Now, Unicorn being a privately held company valued at $1 billion or more. And that's really considered like, that's the big home run when you can do that. Andre is very proud to say that they have 8 that they're doing that well in that regard. So that's a very strong part of the economy. But what is interesting is that technology has not sort of transferred over to the rest of the economy to the extent that it could. Like, for example, in the manufacturing, in agriculture, they are still a little bit old school, even though they may have this high-tech thing going on the information technology side. In agriculture, they're doing a lot of things just the way they always have. And so one area that we see a tremendous opportunity is to begin to transfer those technologies from the IT sector into applications in such areas as agriculture. Now, agriculture, I think everyone knows, Ukraine is some call it the brain and the breadbasket of Europe, because of its tremendous, amount of exports, and that part of their economy has continued to do well. But we see things like applications of artificial intelligence in the diagnostics on agricultural yields and irrigation and humidity and temperature and things like that. There are some tremendous applications that we're aware of, and also just in the process and manufacturing, artificial intelligence, so on and so forth. So we think that is going to become a significant opportunity going forward, is to begin to identify the old line manufacturers and begin to apply that. One of the other big things that has to happen in Ukraine is the issue of its corruption, and that's the primary thing that Western investors are most concerned about. Is they have a judicial system that is widely recognized as corrupt, and they widely recognize it internally, and they've been working very hard to make changes. But making changes often is getting the people, the judicial people that are involved in it to make those changes, and so they've struggled with that, and that'll be very interesting to see how that comes out. I think what the ideas that have been floated, and an example of the kind of thing that we think we might be able to do, is to put pressure on the system there to create an independent commercial judicial system, such that businesses and litigation in and around between businesses could be part of essentially a separate judicial system outside the existing one. And that's a very interesting concept that's been raised, and that could have a watershed dramatic impact on the willingness and acceptance of Western investors, because the risks they have is they're fearful. We go and build a factory or we begin construction, and let me back up. One of the other issues is just the fear, the risk of investing. There could be the loss of property through war-related activities, or if things don't go well, the loss of litigation where there's no proper judicial recourse. And so these are these big risks that need to be tackled if we're going to attract that kind of support. And we think we can do that. And so what we'll be doing is a series of meetings here in New York and elsewhere to bring together and tackle the topics. Our first one is planned for mid-April, and that will be addressing some other really big issues that are going on. And one is privatization. There's about, I think, 4,000 or 5,000 enterprises now that there's been a great desire to privatize, but they've not been privatized. And the reason they've not been privatized is because of the oligarchs and the people sort of that are in power in these institutions don't want to privatize them, because they are making very handsome profits off these enterprises, just running them as is. And so that's another major thing that's about to happen in Ukraine. And the third one is a move from regional or more national sort of governance to more local and regional governance, where the regions will begin to collect tax revenues and begin to then distribute those revenues. And so that's really a push down to a more local level of governance. So those are three examples of some really dramatic things that are going on. And when you think about when do things change, is when times of crisis. And obviously we're in a time of major crisis in the Ukraine. And so now is really, in a sense, this could be the silver lining on this very, very dark cloud, is that these kind of innovations and these kind of bold changes could come to fore, and that you could have a Ukrainian economy that's strong and vibrant and democratic and free market, and really in a position to provide stability to Europe, and ultimately certainly to Eastern Europe, and to thwart the forces of evil. So actually, we're actually in the process right now of writing a global research report on the entire landfill business. I think there is a wonderful document called "What a Waste" that was written by the World Bank that I would direct you to. Is probably, I think, the most. It's a few years old, but it's really quite good in terms of giving the broad brush on that. So there's about, I think, roughly 2,000 landfills in the U.S. right now, and that number is dropping. And the general challenge appears to be, for our initial research, is that municipalities and governments are really scrambling to figure out what to do with this waste. New York spends $400 million a year just transporting their waste away. We put out about 3 tons a day in New York, and that then gets taken to transfer stations and it's put on barges and goes as far away as South Carolina and elsewhere. And that's not a problem, not dissimilar to situations all over the world. So these landfills essentially are the way it's being dealt with now. And typically people pay $30 a ton to drop called a tipping fee. So you go to these landfills, you roll up your truck, and you pay some fee to take, and they put it in the landfill, which obviously is not the best solution. There's really sort of 4 things that you can. First thing you do is you recycle. So that's what we try to pull stuff out that can get recycled. Incineration is really what happens next. I mean, that's probably the most common way that the trash is being treated today is incineration, just simply burning it and turning it into electricity. The stuff I was talking about is sort of the next level, which typically it's high temperature pyrolysis, which can break these can break the carbon essentially out into fuels and gases and so on. So broad brush, these landfills, they're under pressure to do something. They're scrambling for solutions. It's a worldwide challenge. In some countries, it also really depends. Each part of the, when you're doing this sort of this, they call it feedstock. The stuff you put into the incinerator or into the reactors that generate good stuff out the back end. That's considered your feedstock. So in the case of the technology in Canada, that is wood waste. So that's, remnants from wood factories, pallets, a tremendous amount, and that's a consistent feedstock. So if you have a consistent feedstock going in, then you can get a consistent offtake or a consistent output. And that's really what is one of the most important things, is because in every geography, every region, every culture, the nature of their waste and the composition of their waste is very different. It's like what people put out in Costa Rica is very different than the waste streams in Southern California or in New York. And that's obviously related to the economies, the cultures, the diets, all these kinds of things are factors. So I mean, that's sort of the broad brush on, but the number of landfills is massive. And for many in parts of the world, let's say, Indonesia and some of these areas, there's entire communities of people that live off the waste. I mean, they literally, their home is next to the dump, and they go in there and they can maybe make $25 a week. And to some extent, it supports an entire culture. Entire communities live off these dumps, which is certainly tragic that they have to have that meager and existent. But I think it is indicative that this trash in the future, given these technologies, is actually going to become valuable. And particularly the technology that I've been describing here, where the trash can be turned into useful fuels. Diesel, SAF, the sustainable airline fuel. I mean, this is valuable stuff. I mean, this is $5, $6, $10 a gallon that can come out of this. And so you have I think it's a tremendous opportunity, but it's also it's a tremendous opportunity, and I think it's a growing area, and I think it's an area that's going to really become big because it solves like 4 problems. One, you gotta the landfill issue, the greenhouse gas issue, the leach it into pollution into the society issue, and then the generating clean fuel. And if you're able to do all that and actually turn a profit, then you have a really powerful model to rapidly scale around rapidly scale. So we're quite excited about that.
Now, what about addressing the waste culture? We have a culture now where before, when you bought something, like for example, I have a grinder that I have for 40 years. Now you cannot buy anything that lasts more than a couple of seasons. So is there any focus on manufacturers to produce stuff that lasts longer so it doesn't become waste, or is that a forgotten issue because of the influence of the companies?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm certainly very waste conscious myself, and I think that's something the individuals, just awareness, I think, is the only thing we can do, and maybe just putting pressure on people to begin to pay attention to their climate footprint. Really, that's surprising. I haven't really seen that popularized, where people are really, keeping track of what are they really doing. I guess no one really wants to know, because they know they're polluting more than they should. Certainly in the United States, we're the worst. I think we're 3 tons a day, or three tons per. I get my statistics wrong, but we basically pollute like we generate 3 times as much waste as do people in other parts of the world. And I think that's just our culture. So, but
that culture is fostered by the manufacturers, and that the fact that there are no laws that give the manufacturers an incentives to create products that have more value and more lasting value.
Yeah, no, I think it'd be great if you have some thoughts on how to do that. I think that's just going to be in the schools. We have to start when kids are young, and educate them. It's education is really, at the end of the day, is what really drives it all.
That's very true. Well, let me move on to, let me ask Susie. Susie, how are we doing with all our questions?
We have some questions from the audience. So, Brett, if you'd like,
okay. Can we start with the questions?
Sure. So the first one's related to data centers. As you mentioned in your presentation, they consume a lot of energy. So how can we help data centers consume less energy and contribute to the environment in a positive way?
Okay, that's a great question. I think really the primary thing, that we're looking at is microprocessors or processing to just use less heat. And so the microprocessor, this new processor that's been being developed is dramatically faster and uses a lot less energy. And it's a technology that, interestingly, NASA is looking to use for their Mars related efforts. They need processors that are just far faster than the ones that are being made today. So in this regard, I think it's going to be that. I think could be opportunities, for a sort of waste, or rather energy management. These centers generate a tremendous amount of heat, and that really has a very significant impact on the local environment. And then they consume a tremendous amount of water. So it's a massive problem. And I'm hopeful that simply faster computing power with less energy is I think the only way that I can see this problem getting resolved.
That makes sense. And what about, I know sometimes data centers will leverage like fleets, or there's kind of like indirect emissions that way. So maybe looking toward electric vehicles, for example. Do you think that's also a way that they're exploring?
I think so, but I don't really know. I think the big problem is just these, computer upon computer, just literally buildings as big as blocks loaded up with computing power, and you just got to run those things somehow. And that's, getting access obviously to, some of these places, this is particularly, relevant in the crypto space, which really is tremendously consumptive of energy. So often, the crypto, miners will locate their facility in a geographic location that's cold, it's where it's a colder environment. I think that's about all I can offer, which is simply to find ways to generate, and obviously we would be well served to consume less data, but that seems like that's like Christine was saying with regard to the consumption of stuff. I mean, we are just data hogs, and it's going to get worse. So I think there's a real opportunity to try to find, hopefully we can find a better, cheaper way to generate this electricity.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. So going on to the situation in Ukraine, how do you think, or who do you think are the most relevant people who can assist and accelerate the situation in Ukraine? Like, which organizations and individuals have been most helpful in your experience so far?
Okay, that's a good point. I mean, right now we're trying to sort that out, and I think it's the DFC, the International Direct Finance Corporation, which has basically they've released $250 million. It's a Washington, D.C. organization, and they're planning to offer another $750 million. And this is basically funding for the economy there. And then USAID is the other group. So there's a couple of groups in Washington, and ultimately I think it's going to be, who has the golden rule, who has the money, makes the rules. And I think where there's a significant opportunity is now, is for the kind of things that Christine was mentioning earlier about them sort of not going through and following through with commitments to deal with the corruption issue. I think the U.S. is in a position now where if they don't do those things, the money is not forthcoming. And so I think that's a unique, powerful tool that Zelensky would have to push through, because he's trying to make these changes. He wants to see these changes happen, but there's tremendous pushback. The status quo does not want these changes because these guys are doing really well. But when you have a crisis like this, and you either get the funds or you don't get the funds based on whether you follow through and do what you need to do, I think that could be one. As far as the other organizations that are out there that could be impactful, there are a lot of people doing lots of things, but there really doesn't seem to be any one sort of central coordinating entity. And that, I think, is your questioner there really identifies a real problem. Is that there really isn't anyone doing this, and I think from our perspective, we're looking to play a role to orchestrate the financial and the the environment, where the entrepreneurial, financial, business development crowd. We're hoping to help get them together to basically help orchestrate how do we get Western technology that can be really helpful into this country now, without by reducing the risk. And there are some tools out there. The Germans are now writing insurance policies that basically, if you make investments there and things go south as a result of the war, you're covered on insurance basis. And there's a lot of things the government there can do to incentivize, whether it be they got billions of dollars of hard assets, illiquid assets, basically land and real estate, that could be used as incentives to bring it all over. So that's a long answer to a short question, but there really isn't. We're starting on this process to identify the organizations that really can do things, and there really doesn't seem to be a one-stop shop to find them. I mean, Christine, for example, has done some amazing work with her group, and there's some other groups Friends of Ukraine. I mean, there's a number of wonderful groups doing wonderful things. I don't know that they're as well coordinated and connected as they should be.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you're highlighting a very big issue. It shows the importance of organizations like yours getting involved. So what can we learn from history and the situation in Ukraine, and how the US and other major powers and the UN can evaluate the situation for future best to come? Is Altru planning to help highlight this situation?
You know, that's a very good point, because one of the questions that gets asked is, we were not ready in 1990-91 for Russia to come tumbling down. And the question is, will we make the same mistake again? Will we also be unprepared? Because it's my view that Russia is going to go through that scenario again, likely, where things kind of come unglued. And then the question is, and then you have a country there that's not been really developed, no managerial class has been developed. It's essentially, it's been a mob operation. It's run by a mobster. And it's all energies to enrich him and his friends, without sort of reinvesting in the country and everything else. So I think that thing could come unglued. And so the question is, will the West be ready? And I think what we would like to do is in a sense, yes, because the neighboring enterprise, the neighboring country, Ukraine, we would like to think is going to be a strong and able country that's not corrupt and that has capable managers and capable laws and things that work, and an economy that thrives and can run. And I think a strong Ukraine could perhaps help create a democratic and a well-run Russia at some point down the road. And I think you sort of reinforced my point that it's sort of a swamp again. I mean, Russia is a swamp, and he's made it a swamp. And the smart people have all left, and there is no sort of infrastructure that's really in place. So I think he will tumble, and then he'll have a mess. And then the question is, will the West be ready to step in and do something positive? These are all very difficult questions, but one thing I am sure is that a strong, vibrant, democratic Ukraine is a good idea, and for everyone involved. And the Russian people in particular, the Russian people would benefit by that. Vladimir Putin won't benefit by that, nor will his cronies who have been raping and pillaging, but the Russian people will be. So I think that's where we just got to focus on making that happen. And I think good things will come from it. I mean, I think where I'm thinking is that, if the financial and entrepreneurial and business interests become organized and powerful, they can begin to affect change that I don't think we're going to see from our governmental leaders. I just don't see much talent there at all in our government. And we don't make it attractive for people to go into government. And as a result, I mean, there are some obviously fine people in government, but for the most part, it's not really our best and brightest. Our best and brightest are in industry, in academia, maybe, and the entrepreneurial business community. And they're the ones that can drive the ship going forward. And so I think what our idea is that if we can get that group organized and in greater positions of influence in Washington regarding what happens in Ukraine, that would be I think could be a very powerful outcome and a positive outcome. But that takes organization. So that's why we're doing this.
Yeah, you highlight such a great point. So could you elaborate on what you believe the optimal balance that we can strike to have a productive and effective collaboration between the public and private sector to make a positive impact in society, like what you're trying to do?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I guess in a perfect world, you'd get the best and brightest to figure out, like, what are the solutions? What are the ways to get this done? And the best and brightest, I mean, again, from the private sector, and then to get some sort of influence and buy-in from the government, from the governmental leaders, and for them to basically say, fine, you guys have a handle on what this is what makes sense, what works. You've committed to trying to make it work. We are here to help. So how can we help? In this particular case, I think it's organizing sort of this rebuild strategy and taking it to Washington and saying, we need to use the economic levers of the financial support that's being sent to impose the right things to force that society to clean up their court system, for example, to essentially do best practices across the board. What are the best ways to, whether it be landfills, is a simple example, whether it be artificial intelligence, whether it be computer centers. I mean, you're looking at a country it's almost going to be like a blank canvas. Much of it's completely destroyed, so you're starting from scratch. But you also have, a country with tremendous natural resources and also a very talented population. Unfortunately, many have left, but I think they will come back if it looks like there's a sensible plan going forward. So I think it's going to be collaboration, cooperation between the business interests in America and the West and the dollars that the Americans are willing to spend, and making sure those dollars get spent in the right place.
It's really helpful. Thank you. So how can your work with Ukraine be replicated in other countries? For example, my family's from Lebanon, and the situation between Ukraine and Russia is very similar to the situation historically between Lebanon and Syria. I'm not sure if you follow the region at all. There's a lot of great talent, entrepreneurial thinking, innovation that exists in Beirut, but the crisis and the level of corruption has been an inhibitor for growth. So how can similar programs help in areas like this?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, is there capital? Do the Lebanese entrepreneurs and business people, do they have access to capital? Or is that a challenge for them?
It's a huge challenge. Right now, the Lebanese pound, I think $1 is worth like 1 million Lebanese pounds, and they're going through hyper deflation and are unable to access cash. So that's a huge problem that they're dealing with.
Yeah, gosh. And what are the Americans doing anything to help?
I'm aware of some companies, like my cousin actually works for a firm based in San Francisco where they're outsourcing talent and labor to Lebanon. So programs like this, I think, are very helpful because if they're paid in dollars, then it takes them a long way out there. But I'm not aware of many other programs. So it sounds like what you're saying is first getting access to the capital is the best way to start.
Well, I think what you're talking about there is actually a good thing as well, because you're right. I mean, what's amazing is the amount of talent that exists in some of these countries where they're just not being rewarded in even a fraction of their sort of the international market value. I mean, what you would pay someone in the United States versus what you'd pay someone in Turkey, for example, or Portugal or Lebanon is really there's quite a delta between that. So, I mean, I think maybe the globalization of the economy, may be helpful in that sense, that the distance learning and distance employment can become utilized like is happening there. So that's probably, the best thing to do is to try to develop international outlets to, connect talent to opportunity.
Are you aware of any case examples of where corruption has been minimized in a certain country, like the way we talked about we need to minimize corruption in Ukraine? It's a huge issue. Do you know any examples of where this has happened successfully in other parts of the world?
I do not.
Fred, what are some impressive unicorn companies you're aware of that are contributing to UN Sustainable Development Goals?
Oh gosh, I'm going to have to take a pass on that. I can get back to you on that. There, Andrei Kolodjuk, who is our essentially the co-founder of this whole effort. Really, he has had about he's been in 30 deals and he's had about 14 exits. And so I'm not really much of a unicorn observer at the moment, but I'd be happy to get back to you on that with some company information.
That would be great. Thank you. So going on to what I thought was a very interesting metric you gave, that New York spends about $400 million a year just transporting waste away. Yet there's so much garbage and waste on the streets. Like when I walk around the city, what do you think needs to be done to tackle this problem if so much money is already being invested in cleaning up the city today? Gosh,
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's amazing that, I mean, and I think the money that I described, and I'm digging in a little bit more, but this was just to get rid of the waste. This is not the money that's spent collecting the waste. And so, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a good answer for you on that. That's what could be done. I mean, I think we just got to all have to waste less, and then maybe make sure that the municipal players are doing their job and getting the stuff off the streets.
But I have one more question. I don't know whether you're on focusing that also, but have you done any research on the garbage dump in the Pacific Ocean?
Well, I do know that there are tremendous amounts of plastic waste in particular that is going on, and that is a huge problem. And interestingly, I think the technology I've been describing does have a way to address that. And historically, the problem with plastic is there's all different types of plastic, so it's really hard to recycle because you could have like 7 or 8 different types of typical plastic waste. A PET bottle is different than a wrapper is different from a milk bottle, is different from a shampoo bottle, is different from a what I think is going to happen, or I think where there's some hope, is that instead of trying to recycle plastic, you just grind it up and you convert it into fuel. You gasify it essentially. You gasify it and then you turn the gas into fuel. So I'm hopeful that some of these technologies I've been describing could begin to address the plastic problem as well.
Were you aware of the fact that originally when they created plastic and they saw that it was a problem with basically producing anything else of it, the industry offered to make the plastic a little thicker so it could be recycled, but the governments decided that they wanted to have less plastic, so they made it so that plastic can disintegrate into tiny little pieces, and that is why fish and human beings and our bodies are full of plastic. Were you aware of that?
No, I was not, but it doesn't surprise me. The government often makes a lot of big mistakes in long.
Well, this one is a major boo-boo.
So you spoke a bit about landfills, recycling, incineration. What was the last option you mentioned that would be a better alternative to putting waste in landfills?
Well, right now I think it's basically the first level is you recycle it. The second level would you be incinerate it and then get the energy from it. The third level is what I've been describing, which is to convert it into fuel. And then the last level is you got to just leave it in the ground and you put it in the landfill. So it's really sort of 4 levels. And what's happened historically is that it's pretty much just gone, it used to pretty much just go all right to level 4, right? I mean, people or they would burn it. I mean, that's what happens in many parts of the world. They just burn trash. And obviously what it does for the environment is horrendous. But that's pretty much how people have been dealing with it. And now recycling has come along over the last 15 or 20 years, I guess, to become an approach. But it's this whole notion of converting it into fuel is really pretty new. I mean, we're talking almost brand new in the sense the plant that I'm describing. The first ones are just being built now that use the technologies I described. And the plant that we're hoping to fund and build in Costa Rica would be, I think, maybe the first in the world. Well, depending how you look at it, the second or third or so in the world. There's the one being built now is in the UK. So it's an exciting sort of time if these plants prove out to be as successful as they could be, and that's simply measured on their financial return. In other words, these plants are highly profitable with internal rates of return like pushing 20%. So this is kind of like, if you didn't even have any concern at all about environment, if you were just completely disconnected, it wouldn't matter. This is still you'd make more money here than you would make anywhere else. So that's why we think it's a tremendous impact opportunity, because you can make, tremendous, very solid financial returns, but also have, solving 3 or 4 big problems that are imminent and problematic today.
That's really fascinating. Are you aware of any, since it's relatively new, are there potential negative implications at the moment or risk factors to the environment, or is it mainly positive?
I think it's pretty much all positive. I guess you never know till the very end, but I think it's pretty much all positive, because there's just very little emissions being generated from this whole process, and just a lot of emissions being reduced. So I think from an environmental point of view, it's very, very positive.
Thank you.
Well,
And
go on, Susan.
last question is, how can audience members get involved in the impactful work you're doing?
Well, that's a nice offer. I think we're about to roll out a newsletter to track on both of these levels. On the climate project, we're going to start to produce, it's been in the works now. We're about to launch a website that aggregates all this information, that puts up the research I described, and then also a companion newsletter. So I think we'd be delighted to, they could just essentially pay attention to what we're doing. And if they see ways or have an interest to provide research or connections or introductions to anyone who might want to be involved in either of the projects, that would be great. So we're happy to, altruinstitute.com is our website, and we'll be adding to that as we go. But we'd be happy to send an email out to your entire audience, and you guys have done a great job with your weekly program. I've really been impressed, Christine, with what you've done and the consistency of quality. I've had a chance to be part of a number of them. I'm really flattered and honored to be invited to be part of this one today. So we look forward to working with WIT and this and your network here for progress.
Well, all I can say, Brett, thank you very, very much for taking the time to share with us everything that Altru is doing. I am not surprised that Costa Rica is the one that is making such a big impact. First, they eliminated the army, and then they really improved the status of Costa Rica to a really democratic country. And now they're doing something that will help the entire world. So that is just very, very good news, which is a good note to end on. So thank you for sharing with us all the stuff that you're doing. And we, of course, wish you continued success, and we'll be in touch as usual. As you know, Mariam is on our own board of directors. And Susie, thank you very much for monitoring. And so have a very good week, and take good care of yourself. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.